My advice to Republicans is one sentence: don't be racist.
Right.
And let me tell you why.
That's pretty challenging.
Yeah,
That's a
tough.
core element of MAGA. It's pretty challenging.
It's simple, it's direct, but it's a huge challenge.
Don't be you, Donald Trump. Don't be somebody else. Hello and welcome to the Bulwark Podcast. I'm your host, Tim Miller. I'm pumped to be here today with my old pal, Mike Madrid, coming straight at us from the underrated city of Sacramento. Madrid's a Republican barely consultant. He's the author of the new book, The Latino Century, How America's Largest Minority is Transforming Democracy. It's out June 18th. What's up, brother?
How you been, man? It's been a long time.
Yeah, it has been too long. Has it been since? It might have been my book stop in Sacramento, my book tour stop in Sacramento. Was that the last time we hung out?
That was the last time that I saw you in person for sure. Yeah. I think we probably chatted a couple times since then. But yeah, that's been a while.
Well, let's do it. Let's get caught up. I want to start. I want to get into your book and kind of big think stuff about the Latino vote and Latino bloc. It's something we don't talk enough about here on this podcast. But just right off, I kind of want your consultant hat on.
Yeah.
And what you think about the state of the race, what you think about, the Democratic poll truthers, what you think about the fallout from the conviction, like where do you think things stand now, right now in the presidential race?
I have been saying for the past 18 months or so that the fundamentals of this race strongly have been leaning towards a Biden reelection. I'm now taking a deep breath. Like, we're seeing enough data that the consolidation of his base is not coming together. If Biden's base were coming together, he'd be in a much stronger position. We know Republicans are largely going to consolidate, but we're heading into summer now, and it's getting a little bit late to have the gap being this wide. And I'm also not seeing the messaging coming from the Biden campaign that I'd like to see to keep working class folks, especially Black and brown folks, from leaving. And that's what I think is setting this race apart from 2020. Is 2020 was really all about how many GOP defections could we get? How many Republicans could we get to wake up and move away from Trump? We've got a more significant problem that remains, but they're also hemorrhaging these Latino voters predominantly, but African American men also. And so, Tim, I'm a little bit worried about their capacity to prevent that loss. They seem to be kind of the Democratic Party that thinks it's all just about turnout still, and it's clearly not. I mean, how are you seeing it?
Yeah, no, I mean, that is pretty close to how I kind of assess things. It's funny. I've gone a couple other podcasts like in more liberal progressive sphere, and I'm like, I kind of, in 2020, I felt like I was ringing the bell about how the Democrats need to focus more on our people, Bulwark, never Arvat people, the Lincoln Project people, right? Like, and how like they need to do better at maximizing that vote, because that's going to be so key to Biden. And that message has kind of gotten through, and that vote is doing pretty well. If you look at the numbers, it's sticking with Biden to a large degree. I think there's still some room to gain there with some of the Haley voters. There's still a battle happening over some segment of the former Republican or barely Republican vote, college educated. But like the real battleground this time is consolidating these traditional Democratic constituencies. Yeah. And that's where I'm nervous. And, I think that's true, especially with Latino and African-American men. And it's kind of one of the reasons why I wanted to have this conversation. Yeah. So I was hoping you were going to tell me that my concerns were unfounded, but I guess not.
I mean, they're not unfounded at all. The nature and the coalitions of both parties are shifting.
Yeah.
If the polling is to be believed, and I'm not one of those people that says it's all garbage. There's some truth to all of this stuff. The Democratic Party is now in its least ethnically diverse position since 1960.
Wow.
Like, they're hemorrhaging working class people, and it's really a working class problem.
Yeah.
That is overlaying, the working class is increasingly Black and brown in this country. That's what's happening.
Right.
And they're more economic voters than they are race and ethnic voters, the way they were 10, 15, 30, 40 years ago. And that transformation is really redefining the contours of the coalitions of both parties. And that's the math. The math is not good for the Democrats there. There's a lot more I shouldn't say undereducated. With Donald Trump, I love the undereducated.
Yeah. That's okay. Non-college. There's no judgment here.
education.
Yeah, no judgment. Non-college. It's not an elite thing. It's just we're trying to describe the type of voters we're talking about. I get that. That's not. We know where you're going with that. So I want to talk about how you think the Democrats can do better with this group, but let's just do a little bit more on the polling side and the potential that there's maybe that something's being missed. One thing, there's been one consistent miss against that has undercounted Democrats over the past few cycles, right? Like there's sometimes a lot of smoke and mirrors in these like poll trutherism discussions. People are like, well, it was supposed to be a red wave, and then it wasn't a red wave. And it's like, okay, well, if you actually look at the polls, a lot of the numbers were pretty close to accurate. Yeah. One area where the Democrats though have been undercounted is Spanish-speaking Latinos, and in Nevada. This is something I'm just eyeing about Nevada. The polls are very bad for Biden right now in Nevada. I'm open to the possibility that that's just real, that's a shift that's happening. I do think the other possibility is that Latino voters who speak Spanish as their primary language are getting either missed or undercounted in the mix. What do you think about that theory?
I don't buy it.
Okay.
And I'll tell you why. It's actually central to the book and my research and work. And a credible poll, every credible survey instrument of Latino voters that I've looked at over 30 years, and I've looked at and developed many, many hundreds of them, has about 15 to 17% of the interviewees in Spanish. Anything you go, that's not a lot. I mean, conventional wisdom would be like, oh, it's like a third or 40% are in Spanish. No, it's only 15 to 17% of Spanish speakers or voters prefer interviews in Spanish. And they tend to be recently naturalized. These are immigrants themselves that became citizens and are now voting. They actually have a higher turnout rate, a higher propensity to vote than second and third generation voters.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So getting to 15 to 17% of Spanish speakers is usually not that difficult. And even if you missed it by 3 to 5%, your data's not going to be terrible.
Yeah.
What's really, I think, happening, Nevada, by the way, is very interesting because Nevada, of all the swing states, it has been in the past 2 or 3 election cycles been moving towards a more Republican position. Mm-hmm. The bigger concern that Democrats have is they're losing third generation, which is the fastest growing segment of the Latino vote. And now there's a discernible fourth generation that we can actually gauge in polling. And that's where they're losing these voters.
So help me with quick math here. So third generation is like the grandchildren of people that came in the 60s.
Yeah, or I hate to say more recently, but let me put it this. Yes. I mean, my grandparents came in the 40s.
Yeah.
I have children that are voting age now. They're fourth generation.
Right. Okay.
Probably around the 60s would be third generation. Now, just demographically, I hate to be so nerdy on this.
No, it's a nerd out. This is why you're here.
Out a little bit more. In 2007 was really when the peak waves of immigration started to fall dramatically. Right after the Great Recession started, which is really a depression now. A lot of those migrants left and people absolutely stopped coming. And we've had a 17-year lull up until about the year 2020 when it started back under the Biden administration. That lull in immigration created a big pause of the recently naturalized voter coming in and becoming a citizen and registering to vote. And now 80% of all new Latino registrants are U.S. born, compared to 2002 when it was over 50%. So the Latino voter now going forward is dramatically different than it was. And it's why you're seeing, like in polling on Biden's executive action on immigration, there's not much of a discernible difference between Latinos and non-Hispanic whites on border security. They want more border security. They're saying, fix the border, and then we'll talk about a pathway to citizenship and DACA and all that stuff.
Now, I'm sorry, Mike, but that can't be true, what you just said, because we were told for years by Fox that under the Obama administration, there was a massive invasion that was happening. So I don't know where are the people that invaded us during the Obama years?
They're hiding. They're hiding.
Oh, okay.
It's quiet. It's going to be a quiet, slow invasion.
Got it.
But yeah, I think in time we will realize that Fox was right.
So, all right. So let's talk then bigger. Well, just one more thing on Nevada. You're with me then on being kind of bearish on the state of like the Nevada trajectory and just the demographic makeup makes that. To me, I think Nevada seems like the toughest, besides maybe Georgia, of the main competitive primary states.
I think Nevada to me is tougher than Georgia.
Even tougher, you think?
Yeah. And the Latino vote is a big part of that. And again, they're not losing, the culinary union is a big deal in Nevada, obviously. They're not losing those voters. They're going to be fine. And most of the polling, by the way, has been a little bit tricky, not just in Arizona, but in Nevada also. It's a very similar demographic where you have this 5-point leaning Republican sort of miss in the polling.
Right.
They do Mexicans. It's Mexican American vote there, by the way, almost predominantly in Arizona, Nevada, California. They vote very similarly, high 20s level of support for the Republicans. Very rarely are you breaking into like the 30s, mid 30 range.
Yep.
Polling will always show it like in the mid 30s, even high 30s sometimes. And every time it comes right back into that historic range. Those three states, we see that phenomenon over and over and over again. So I think the polling is leaning more Republican than it actually is. But it's, when it's razor thin the way Nevada is, I think it's more likely than Georgia and Arizona to go for Trump.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm almost marking it off mentally, and happy to be surprised. I'm feeling
you're
more
trying to reset expectations. So
yeah, no,
okay.
I'm not. I'm just telling you. I'm just giving you real talk here. I feel better about Arizona. Which maybe we'll talk about that on the back end. But let's go to the bigger trends you've seen in as you looked at the book. How this voting bloc is transforming. Like, what is different about the Latino voting bloc now than, say, in 2008? When DACA was such a big issue, where Obama really, I think, did benefit by arguing for liberalized immigration. Like, talk about the changes over the course of the next, 15, 20 years.
And that's really kind of the foundational question of the book, Tim. So thank you for asking it. The really big transformation is the fact that we've always talked about how Latinos are not monolithic and there's all this diversity. Most people look towards like country of origin to find that diversity. Cubans are not Mexicans, or not Puerto Ricans, or not Venezuelans.
Just so you know, I had a mental drinking game to see when the word monolithic would come up, and we made it 12 minutes. So that's pretty good.
I won't say sleeping giant either, because you'll be drunk before noon. So with all of that, diversity, the real demarcation has always been the generational divide.
Okay. And
there's been essentially 3 generations that we've looked at. First generation, recent migrants. Second, their sons and daughters. Third, their grandchildren. The explosion in Latino numbers now, and Latinos surpassed Black voters in 2020. And now the numbers are going to start hitting kind of an exponential rate. Almost all of that growth is happening in the third generation. It's no longer a recently migrated vote. And so Spanish speaking is dropping off of a cliff. It's why Univision and Telemundo are in like really deep consumer demographic trouble. These audiences are really falling apart. They're collapsing. And the perspectives on immigration are very different. There's not as many DACA people anymore as there were in 2008. I hate to say it. 2008 was a long time ago, right? And so, there's been literally almost.
I guess there are as many DACA people because we haven't solved it. None of them have gotten status thanks to the Republicans, but we're not as a percentage of the pie.
I'm sorry, correct. As a percentage of the Latino population, that's well put. So we're not. As if you look at the Latino public opinion as a whole, the share that are primarily concerned or prioritized issues around DACA, immigration reform, and pathway to citizenship is shrinking considerably. And the share of Latinos that want more border security. In fact, most of the rightward shift that we've seen in the past few years is happening along the border, with Latinos along the border in the Rio Grande Valley, southern New Mexico, southern Arizona, even Central Valley and southern California. So all of that is happening while this third and now fourth generation are growing. So generationally, the projections going forward, and keep in mind, America will be for the first time, in a long time, a non-white majority country in about 8 years, due largely to explosive Latino growth. And that growth is not from immigrants. It's
Right.
from really the grandchildren and great-grandchildren of immigrants who have a completely different perspective on immigration issues, even though immigration has never been a top issue for even first-generation voters.
Yeah. This is, I think this is a key point that just to really dig in on, because it goes against conventional wisdom. And I think that it's something that I talk and write about a lot with the white young Republican vote, but it's the same, but there's this parallel here with the younger Latino vote, which is like, there's some conventional wisdom among the political set, among the journalist set, that like younger voters are more liberal on these traditional social issues, immigration, race, abortion, guns, gays. It's true on gays. But on some of these issues, like that's not really the case. And like on immigration, it's similar, like when you look at the Republican vote, like the younger voters are the most MAGA, right? Like, which like breaks people's brains when they think about that. Like they're the most like in line with the Donald Trump agenda. And when the Latino voters, you would think that the younger voters might like whatever be more liberal on immigration policy. Not true, right?
Correct.
Like, and so talk about that and like what that means about how Trump is able to appeal to them and what Democrats are missing talking to younger Latino voters.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because you can probably educate me on a little bit too. But I'm gonna try to thread both of these together, because when we're talking about younger voters, Latinos are almost 40% of Latinos are under 30. These voters. So it's a dramatically dramatically younger age cohort. Like it's really, really young. Almost 40% of Latino voters voted in 2016 or more recently for their first time.
Yeah,
and they are more MAGA. But they're also more Bernie Sanders. They're more populist.
Yes. Yeah.
In a lot of the precincts that Donald Trump won in Hispanic dense precincts, Bernie Sanders won in the primary. So they're responding. It's the same voter. And there's a huge correlation between this younger populist cohort you're talking about, which is not a traditional, conservative like you and I were when we were kids. They're MAGA. They're populist. They're nationalist. It's the exact same dynamic that's happening with Latinos, who are saying, we don't believe in the parties, really. We're not buying either of your guys' bullshit. Like the system is rigged.
Yeah, right.
And when we say system, we mean the Democratic and Republican Party. And that was really most pronounced. I saw it for the first time in the Nevada caucuses in the 2016 election, when Bernie Sanders kind of shocks the world and Hispanics go for over Hillary by a shocking degree.
Yeah.
And it was, if you were under 35, a Latino under 35, you had an 80% plus propensity to vote for Bernie Sanders. If you're over 35, 80% propensity to vote for Hillary Clinton. Like it was this massive chasm. And people were motivated by the anti-establishment message, not just in the Democratic Party. We saw it again with Trump later that year. And so what you're tapping into something that people really have not explored nearly enough. And we're seeing that fuzziness in the polling now, which pollsters are getting results back and going, that can't be. Like non-white Hispanics, non-white voters can't be voting like that. But there are. They have been. Yeah. And they've been telling us for a long time in the data that this is not what we typically have stereotypically viewed as a minority vote, quote unquote minority voter. It's foundationally different. And a lot of people are saying it's kind of this racial realignment that's happening. I don't see it that way at all, because it's not a voter that's changing its voting behaviors. It's emerging. These are new voters with a new attitude. So this is not like the Southern Democrats, where there was a realignment. People were voting with one party that wasn't reflecting their values for 30 years. And then they wake up one day and like, oh, wait a second. I've been voting for Republicans. Maybe I'm a Republican. That's not at all what's happening. This is the emergence of something entirely new that's not meeting the standard definitions of a minority voter as we've known it. And populism, to your point, and again, there's a huge overlap between young voters and Latino voters. It's the same age cohort. They are absolutely reflecting a populism that is shaking both parties to their core.
Yeah, this is just so important, because like it has my brain moving, because when people look at the numbers, they are like, when you think about it, not in a data level, but in a human level, it's like, it's not like, Juan, who's 50, who voted for Obama and voted for Hillary and voted for Biden, is now like, oh, I'm mad at the Democrats, I'm switching now to Trump. Like, that's not what's happening. Like the
Correct.
makeup of the Latino electorate is changing, and the new people that are coming in are less Democrat. So let's talk about that a little bit more. What there are two questions I have for you in response to that. One, messaging wise, how can the Democrats reach these people? But two, I think even more important that like how do they actually get to them? Like, because I think about this and you're like, man, 40% of Latino votes under 30. These people are not watching cable. They're not reading the New York Times. They're not, watching TV ads, probably,
Right.
Yeah, so like, yeah. So, all right. So like, yeah. Are they even being talked to? Are they even being talked to by the Democrats in any meaningful way?
So great questions, both of them. So let me answer the second one first. I think they're trying to, right? But the way they are consuming information, to your point, is they over-index dramatically online and on their handheld devices. Like these are folks that are living on their phones. That's their whole experience. They're not reading the New York Times. They're not reading, they're not watching, the ads that are coming out on broadcast or even cable. So there has to be a more sophisticated messaging strategy. And I think it's also why populism is on the rise. It's just so much easier to be anti-establishment and anti-institution. Incidentally, and this is a really important point, Latinos by a wide metric, display greater confidence in virtually all of our institutions, which is a very optimistic and hopeful part of restoring kind of American-style democracy, right? Yeah. Whether it's government, media, higher education, military, church, all of them. They've got much higher levels of trust and confidence with two exceptions, the Republican and Democratic Party. And that's why there's this kind of anti-establishment system is rigged sentiment. And tactically, yeah, the Democrats, I think, are not doing as well as they need to with this younger age cohort to get the performance they need to traditionally win a race like the one we're heading into. The messaging becomes particularly problematic in some ways because there's a larger gender gap amongst Latinos than any other race or ethnicity. Women, by a wide margin, are breaking towards the Democratic Party. Men, U.S.-born Hispanic men, are breaking towards Trump and the Republican Party. And the reason why is we also have the largest education divide. Our women are going to college at far greater rates than our men are, and that has political implications. So in many ways, this assimilative effect is actually benefiting Democrats, especially on Dobbs and abortion and the cultural issues that we've been talking about that kind of animate the Democratic base now. The women are there, third, fourth generation, they've got them. Men are a little bit different, and that's where they're having trouble kind of both communicating with them on message and kind of selling them that Bidenomics has worked. It quantifiably has not. Quantifiably, especially with Latinos, 1 in 5 Hispanic men work in the residential construction space or a related field. So a tripling of interest rates, not Biden's problem, but happening during his administration, tripling of interest rates, devaluation of the currency 20-25%. Quantifiably, Hispanic men are not better off than they were 4 years ago, like quantifiably. And so the message has to be more
4.5. 4 years ago, if they're in the construction business, they didn't have any jobs. But yeah, sure. Yeah, 4.5 years ago.
Fair. Yeah. So, but what we have to do is we have to look at a strategy where they're feeling your pain more than they are convincing them that they're doing well when they are not.
Right. The media side of this feels to me like almost a bigger challenge than the message. Like, sure, like they should do a better job on messaging to working class Americans. I agree with that. We talk about that a lot here. There are ways to do that. But but to do that, you have to have a trustworthy messenger to get there. And I kind of want, just as an exercise, to have a little focus group of 28-year-old Latino men and ask them what they watch, and my guess is it's some stuff that's totally off my radar. That's Spanish speaking stuff, but then it's also the Joe Rogan MMA stuff. It's also right. It's also, this world that the Democrats like don't even engage with, right?
Yes.
Like on a cultural level. And like they really need to put a real effort into identifying, and when I say young, I mean like, because I'm not really young anymore, but like my age and younger, like men, and not me because I'm wearing pearls, like men influencers who are like into men's stuff and like into fucking MMA and into these like podcasts and in that culture who are also like, wait a minute, we don't want these freaks over here, because like there still are a lot of gaps between the Donald Trump, Mike Johnson agenda and what these young men actually want, but I don't know that they're hearing it.
I could not agree with you more. And let me add a little bit of nuance to the education divide that we were just talking about. It's not an income divide. When I was a young guy doing this, we would go after the Republican base. If you made over $100,000 a year, back when $100,000 was $100,000 a year, you could close Republicans always on tax cuts and the S&P 500 and deregulating the economy. That's how we brought them home. That's not the way it works anymore. It's cultural issues, and the correlation between culture and college education is what is important. So what you will see is non-college folks that might be a successful contractor making multiple six figures. They're MAGA, they're red, they're part of a blue collar culture, and blue collar culture is a real thing. It is Joe Rogan, it's MMA, that is where the gap is getting bigger as the Democratic Party becomes more of a white, college-educated, progressive, home-owning, upwardly mobile, higher income party. They're losing touch with that. And this is important because as Latinos are voting more Republican, I strongly believe it's despite their best efforts, not because of them. It's kind of the old adage in reverse where Reagan said, I didn't leave the Democratic Party left me. Latinos are just not relating. Latino men are just not relating to the Democratic Party. It's not that they don't like them. It's just not relatable.
Yeah. I was on this panel yesterday about rural Americans. It's this great group. I'll just shout them out. It's a great group called One Country that's trying to reach out to have the organized Democrats in rural America. My message to them was the exact same thing. It's just like the questions like, well, why aren't rural voters more excited about this agenda that Biden has put forth, where it's like we're building factories again in their communities, and it's chips and it's infrastructure, and we're doing rural broadband. And like my answer is, I don't think they're hearing it. Like I don't like, and it's not that it's not in their media. They are like they know about it, but I mean, literally, they're not hearing it because the people that are telling them about it feel like culturally separate and kind of different and condescending. And it's the same thing. Like the Democrats need to work more at like finding messengers who can speak with credibility. And the whole premise of the RVAP campaign, right, was like, how do we find messengers who can speak with credibility to former Republicans? Like, they got to do that now with working class, not for like former. There, I think there's this box checking sense. It's like, oh, we got Tim Miller, we got Mike Madrid, we got Liz Cheney, we got Kinzinger at least was in the army, so at least like he has calluses on his hands, unlike me, so he's a better bet than me. But you know what I mean? It's like, nah, man, you need to find somebody that like speaks their language, not Spanish, but like their cultural language, and who can then tell them like, wait a minute, no, you're upset about construction. What's these? It's Trump that doesn't want to do, this, that, and the other thing. You know what I mean? And that's like a big miss right now.
It's a big miss. And I think a good way to look at it is Latinos are the fastest growing segment of the blue collar workforce. So these guys are showing up to the construction site, swinging hammers. They're the manufacturing folks working on the assembly lines. They're working in the energy patch. They're in the Rio Grande or New Mexico or Central Valley. These are the folks that are in agriculture, mining, forestry, you name it. Their cohorts, their non-Hispanic white cohorts, who are they? Like that's the people that the New York Times has been focusing on with diners and economic anxiety. The fact that they're voting similarly should not be surprising. There has to be some sort of messenger, to your point, absolutely correct, and infrastructure that allows them to communicate to people culturally where they're at. But, and this is important, I'm also a big believer that if your policy doesn't reflect where people are at, they're going to respond to that too. So when you say like, well, build back better, like these are hard hat jobs. Okay, but blue collar people have never believed that 10 or 15 years down the road, when we start breaking ground on that bridge, there's going to be a better day. One, and part of me kind of gets frustrated with the Democrats going, it's just not that complicated. Just go talk to blue collar people. The other is that, these industries view the Democratic Party as an existential threat to their existence. Like the worker views the Democrat as trying to put them out of work. And in many cases, I would say that's largely true. So it's great that you want to build a chip manufacturer.
What are you talking about? Like car manufacturing and stuff? Like, what are you talking about?
Any manufacturing. I mean, if you're talking to the average guy, I'm not talking about reality.
You're doing your California talk because of CEQA and everything. They're not building everything. I'll listen to in California, but I mean, they're trying to build. Like the Biden's pivoting back towards kind of an American industry.
He's also producing more oil than any president ever has in history. No, I'm not making a policy point. I'm making a political perception point.
Okay.
If you go on to the energy patch and talk to the average oil drilling worker guy on the rig, he's not saying Biden's my guy, right? And he's going to give you a whole lot of economic argument for his industry where he believes that the environmentalists are the bad guys.
Yeah, right.
Reality. I'm talking about politics here.
Yeah.
And that perception is not being broken through by the Democrats, and that's a big problem. Like you said, you've got to have a messenger that can convey it on their terms. Otherwise, you're ceding all those votes.
Yeah, we need more hard hat guys. This has been the Fetterman. This was the Fetterman advantage from the start. Like putting aside all the specifics of Fetterman's like pivot on a couple policies recently. Like he at least sounds like he doesn't want to fuck them over. Right. He looks and sounds like it. Right. And that's half the battle. Even if he's saying all of the same words that Chris Murphy is saying, God love you, Chris Murphy. Like it just feels more credible coming from Fetterman to these people. It's just like
100% right.
That's just human nature. Okay. One more topic I feel like we should just discuss. We've been negging the Dems here. Listening to you, a big insight that I already knew, but that becomes abundantly clear is the great replacement theory is a bunch of fucking bullshit and it's racist bullshit and it's dangerous racist bullshit, but it also is just not true. Like it's the opposite of what you're talking about is happening is that a lot of the further people get away from immigrating into this country, like the more open they are to Republican messaging. And if these assholes weren't just advancing racist bullshit all the time, then Republicans might be doing better even with these groups.
I have two chapters saying what can the Democrats do, and the others what can the Republicans do. Yeah. And my advice to Republicans is one sentence: don't be racist.
Right.
And let me tell you why. That's
pretty challenging. Well, that's a core element of MAGA. It's pretty challenging.
It's simple, it's direct, but it's a huge challenge.
Don't be you, Donald Trump. Don't be somebody else.
But let me run through some quick data points here. If Ron DeSantis, Greg Abbott, former Republican Governor Doug Ducey, even this guy Brian Dahle in California, who was a sacrificial lamb in California against Gavin Newsom, they all have something in common. They all either met or exceeded Donald Trump's numbers with Hispanics. And if you look at most of the competitive congressional districts, the Republicans candidates for the House exceeded oftentimes dramatically where Donald Trump is with Hispanics. It's very strong evidence to suggest that Donald Trump is not bringing these folks to the polls. He's actually an obstacle to greater improvement, which is why I make the point, don't be racist. Like just quit being a nativist racist asshole. And you're going to see Republicans could have a 45% baseline with the Hispanic community, which is extraordinary. When we were doing, George W. Bush stuff together, because we're that old, when we were hitting that upper 30s. Okay,
I was an intern. All right, let's not start aging.
I was a little older than an intern. Yeah. We were hitting, that, low 40s, mid 40s range when the Latino community was much more foreign born with an optimistic pro-Mexico agenda. Like blatantly, directly, clearly, that was part of our appeal. So if you were just flip that on its head, you would be having significantly greater opportunities. And not to bring up the hypocrisy thing, but to bring up the hypocrisy thing, you can't be anti-immigrant and also say you're winning the Hispanic vote, as they're saying. Like, they don't want more Mexicans here, but they're winning the Mexican vote. Like, which is it, guys? Like, if you really had confidence that you were winning this vote, why are you saying it's the Democrats that want them here?
Why are you saying it's a conspiracy that they're bringing them here? The conspiracy, shockingly, the conspiracy breaks down with even like one data point of actual knowledge. But it has caused some mass murders. So there's that with the Great Replacement theory. These fucking assholes. Okay, last thing on Republicans. They'll let you go. I feel like I'm a lone voice on this, but I hear you on the fact that the Latino population has moderated on immigration. And I think maybe they weren't quite as progressive on it as the Democrats thought all along. But in addition, the makeup has moderated. That said, a fucking plan to mass deport 10 million people that includes camps, that includes Donald Trump saying in an interview on Fox the other day, there's like, we'll get rid of 10 bad guys and there might be one mother and maybe she's guilty or maybe she's not guilty, but that's just going to be part of the deal. Like, is there a potential effort, because I think it's a long-term effort to do the other stuff we've been talking about, actually appealing to young Latinos and finding voices and like all that's going to take time. Is there a way to scare them? Is there a way to demonize Trump in enough, in a dramatic enough way to kind of stop the bleeding for this cycle? Or do you just think that stuff, there's a boy who cried wolf element to it?
No, look, it's a great question. And the 1 year that was anomalous in this rightward shift or emergence that we've been talking about was 2018, when Trump was cracking down with ICE and going into communities and pulling people out of factories and houses and deporting them. Yeah. And there was a massive, massive reaction to that. But until it happens, I'm not sure that there is a way, because in many ways, it is the boy who cried wolf stuff. It's been so beaten down that nobody is believing it or listening to it anymore. That's what frightens me the most. When it does happen, there has been this visceral reaction. There is a multi-generational block that comes together to say this is bullshit. But not before then. Not before then, which is so weird, again, as a Californian, because, when Pete Wilson with Proposition 187, that lasted 30 years and a generation. Donald Trump, by everybody's estimation, is far worse than Pete Wilson ever was. I mean, he was kissing Joe Arpaio yesterday on stage at whatever weird right-wing thing he was at.
Well, I'd like if we have any billionaires listening. I think it's worth a try. Maybe call up Mike Madrid. I wouldn't mind seeing a YouTube ad campaign of jackbooted thugs, pulling people out of quinceañeras and sending them into a camp and just trying to freak people out a little bit. Because, by the way, that's real. That's not like pushing grandma over the cliff type stuff. That's a real threat, and some ads that are able to break through, that aren't just he's planning a deportation. Real footage. Yeah.
No, I think you go back and pull the real footage of that from 2018 to remind people this is what happened. This is why you voted that way would work.
Mike Madrid, so thoughtful. Thank you for coming on. His new book, Latino Century, How America's Largest Minority is Transforming Democracy. He's got a podcast, Latino Vote, as well. And let's stay in touch. Let's talk a little bit more as we get towards the fall. How's that sound?
Always love talking to you, buddy. Thanks for the time.